the land and the people who work it. Beyond the cities, Texas is still, in significant ways, a land defined by its relationship with the earth. The ranching tradition that shaped Texas in the 19th century did not disappear, it evolved. The great cattle drives are gone, the railroads made them unnecessary, but the ranches remain. Some of them are enormous by any standard outside of Texas. The King Ranch in South Texas covers nearly 3,200 square kilometers, larger than the state of Rhode Island, and it has been in operation since 1853. It is one of the largest ranches in the world, and it is still actively raising cattle, horses, and crops on land that has been worked by the same family across 5 generations. The agricultural economy of Texas is one of the most productive in the United States. Texas leads the nation in the production of cotton, cattle, sheep, goats, and hay. The Panhandle region, flat and vast and exposed to winds that seem to come from another century, produces enormous quantities of wheat and corn and sorghum in a landscape that has changed little since the first farmers broke this ground more than a century ago. The oil industry transformed Texas in the 20th century with a speed and a completeness that is difficult to overstate. The discovery of oil at Spindletop near Beaumont in 1901, a gusher that shot oil more than 50 meters into the air, was not merely an economic event. It was a cultural one. It created fortunes overnight. It produced a class of Texas wildcatters whose combination of recklessness and ambition became a defining archetype of American capitalism. It shaped the politics and the infrastructure and the self-image of an entire state for more than a century. The Permian Basin in West Texas remains one of the most productive oil fields in the world. The towns of Midland and Odessa, cities of the flat, treeless Permian landscape, connected to the rest of Texas by long, straight roads, that seem to go nowhere and go there very directly, live by the cycles of the oil market in a way that nowhere else in America does. When oil prices are high, money flows through these communities with a freedom that is almost surreal. When prices fall, the consequences are immediate and brutal. This boom and bust rhythm has been the defining economic reality of the Permian Basin for a century. And the people who live here have developed, out of necessity, a relationship with uncertainty that is itself a kind of resilience. The border and what it means. Texas shares 3,000 kilometers of border with Mexico, the longest international border of any American state. This border is not merely a political line. It is a zone of cultural exchange, economic interdependence, and human movement that has been continuous for centuries. The cities along the Texas-Mexico border, El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, Laredo and Nuevo Laredo, McAllen and Reynosa, function in many ways as binational communities. People cross back and forth for work, for shopping, for family visits, for medical care. The economies on both sides are intertwined in ways that no policy can fully disentangle. El Paso is the westernmost city in Texas, separated from the rest of the state by hundreds of miles of desert and mountain and connected to New Mexico and to Ciudad Juarez, across the Rio Grande by bridges that carry tens of thousands of crossings every day. El Paso is majority Hispanic, majority Spanish-speaking in daily life, and deeply embedded in the cultural and economic life of the larger binational region. The violence that has periodically devastated Ciudad Juarez, the product of cartel conflict, casts a shadow across the river. But El Paso itself has consistently ranked as one of the safest large cities in the United States. The border, for the people who live on it, is not the thing that the national political debate makes it. It is simply the geography of home. The Rio Grande Valley in the far south of Texas is one of the most distinctive regions in the country, subtropical in its climate, overwhelmingly Hispanic in its population, economically poor by Texas standards, but rich in the particular cultural depth that comes from long histories. The valley, as its residents call it, produces citrus and sugarcane and vegetables on land that was irrigated out of the Rio Grande, beginning in the early 20th century. It is also one of the most important corridors for northward migration, a landscape that contains the beauty of subtropical nature, the complexity of a borderland culture, and the human drama of people in transit between one world and another. The food that defines a state. Texas does not have a cuisine. It has several, and they argue with each other. Barbecue is the most famous, but Texas barbecue is itself a contested category, divided by region and tradition. In central Texas, in the towns of Lockhart and Luling and Taylor, in the German and Czech immigrant communities that settled the hill country in the 19th century, Barbecue means beef brisket, smoked low and slow over post oak for 12 to 16 hours, served on butcher paper with no sauce, because sauce would be an insult to the quality of the meat. This is the tradition that has become internationally famous, drawing food writers from New York and chefs from Copenhagen. In East Texas, the tradition is different, influenced by the southern barbecue of neighboring Louisiana and Arkansas. In South Texas, the tradition of barbacoa, beef cheeks or head meat, slow-cooked until they yield to the touch, eaten in corn tortillas on Sunday morning, a tradition that predates the German immigrants and the post-oak smoke pits and connects directly to Mexican culinary heritage. Tex-Mex is a cuisine that Texas invented and then exported to the world, and which the world has sometimes confused with Mexican food, to the irritation of Mexicans and the puzzlement of Texans. It is its own thing, a fusion of Mexican culinary traditions with Texas ingredients and Texas appetites, producing dishes like cheese enchiladas smothered in chili gravy, puffy tacos, and the combination plate that includes a little of everything and is served with chips and salsa that arrive at the table before you have ordered anything, because that is simply how it is done. Chicken fried steak is a Texas institution that requires explanation to anyone unfamiliar with it. It is a beef cutlet, pounded thin, breaded in the manner of fried chicken, and pan-fried until golden. It is served with cream gravy, white, thick, made from the pan drippings, and with mashed potatoes and a vegetable that is sometimes a formality. It is not a subtle dish. It is not meant to be. It is the kind of food that makes sense after a long day of physical work in a hot climate, and it has been feeding Texas for more than a century. Music as identity. Texas has produced more significant American music than any other state, and this claim is not as hyperbolic as it sounds. Country music was shaped here, shaped into the commercial form it now takes by Texas artists who brought a particular swagger. Willie Nelson, born in Abbott, Texas, became not merely a country music star but a countercultural figure. A man who represented a vision of Texas that was independent, irreverent, and deeply human. The blues of East Texas, a tradition rooted in the African-American communities of the Piney Woods and the Gulf Coast. Blind Lemon Jefferson, born in Couchman, Texas, was one of the first blues artists to be widely recorded. Western swing, the hybrid of country music and jazz that flourished in Texas dance halls in the 1930s and 1940s. Produced Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, a band whose music was simultaneously rooted in Texas ranch culture and connected to the sophistication of jazz improvisation. The dance halls where Western swing was played, some of them still operating in the hill country, their wooden floors worn smooth by decades of two-stepping. Austin's music scene is a phenomenon of a different order. The clubs on 6th Street and Red River Cultural District, the outdoor venues, the festivals, South by Southwest, Austin city limits, have made Austin one of the most important music cities in the world. A place where every genre coexists and where the tradition of live music 7 nights a week has produced a musical ecosystem that is self-sustaining. Texas is a state of mind, a land of deep history and constant generation, defined by its people and the earth they work. There is a place in the American South that operates, in many important ways, as though it were its own country. It has its own identity, its own mythology, its own flag, which its residents fly with a pride and a frequency that, in any other state, would seem excessive, and here seems simply natural. It has its own cuisine, its own music, its own economy, its own relationship with land and space, and the particular kind of freedom that comes from having more room than you know what to do with. This is Texas, a place like no other. From above, the scale of it is the first thing that strikes you. Texas is the second largest state in the United States, covering more than 695,000 square kilometers, an area larger than France. To drive from its eastern border with Louisiana to its western tip at El Paso takes more than 12 hours without stopping. To drive from its northern border with Oklahoma to the southernmost tip of the Rio Grande Valley takes nearly the same. It is not a state that can be summarized by any single image or any single experience, because it contains within its borders landscapes and climates and cultures that have almost nothing in common with each other except the name on the map. The piney woods of East Texas, dense and humid and green, look nothing like the flat, treeless high plains of the Panhandle, which look nothing like the limestone hill country of the center, which look nothing like the Chihuahuan desert of the Trans-Pecos West, which look nothing like the subtropical Rio Grande Valley of the south, where palm trees line the streets and the air smells of citrus and the border with Mexico is a river you can sometimes wade across. Texas is not one place. It is many places that have agreed, sometimes contentiously, to share a government. To understand Texas is to first understand that Texans believe, with a sincerity that is difficult to dismiss, that their state is different from all others. This belief has a specific historical foundation. Texas was, before it became an American state, an independent republic. From 1836 to 1845, 9 years, the Republic of Texas existed as a sovereign nation with its own president, its own army, its own currency, its own foreign policy. It was born out of a revolution against Mexican rule, in a war that produced the Alamo, the small San Antonio mission where a garrison of Texan defenders was besieged and killed by Mexican forces in 1836. Producing a defeat that became, paradoxically, the founding myth of Texan identity. Remember the Alamo. The phrase is not merely historical, it is a statement of character, a declaration that Texans stand their ground, that they do not retreat, that the scale of the opposition is not, in itself, a reason to surrender. When Texas joined the United States in 1845, it did so on its own terms, retaining the right, unique among American states, to divide itself into as many as 5 separate states should it choose to do so. It never has. But the fact that it could, and that Texans are aware that it could, says something about the particular relationship this state has with its own sovereignty. This mythology of independence, of toughness, of a frontier spirit that has survived the closing of the actual frontier, shapes everything about Texas, how it governs itself, how it presents itself to the world, how its people understand their own identity. And like all powerful myths, it contains within it both genuine truth and considerable exaggeration. Texas was, for much of its history, a rural state. A state of cattle ranches and cotton fields and small towns separated by distances that made neighborliness an exercise in logistics. That Texas still exists, in the high plains and the Trans-Pecos and the brush country of the South. But it is no longer the Texas that most Texans inhabit. Today, Texas is one of the most urbanized states in America. Its 4 major cities, Houston, San Antonio, Dallas, and Austin, are among the largest in the country. And each of them is, in its own way, a distinct argument about what Texas is and what it is becoming. Houston is the largest city in Texas and the 4th largest in the United States, with a metropolitan population approaching 7 million people. It is also, by most measures, the most diverse large city in America. A city where no single ethnic group constitutes a majority, where more than 145 languages are spoken, where the largest Vietnamese community outside of Vietnam exists, alongside enormous Mexican, Salvadoran, Nigerian, Indian, Chinese, and Pakistani communities, all of them occupying a city that sprawls across a flat coastal plain with a freedom from zoning restrictions that has produced a landscape of extraordinary architectural chaos and, in certain neighborhoods, an urban vitality that more planned cities struggle to achieve. Houston has no zoning laws. This is unusual among major American cities, and it is, depending on your perspective, either Houston's greatest strength or its most significant problem. The result is a city where a nail salon can open next to a chemical plant, where a luxury high-rise towers over a bungalow that has been in the same family for 3 generations, where the city's form follows the logic of the market rather than the logic of urban planning. It is messy. It is also, in places, surprisingly dynamic, a city that reinvents itself constantly because nothing in it is fixed. The energy industry is Houston's foundation. The oil and gas companies headquartered here, and the vast ecosystem of engineering firms, legal practices, financial institutions, and service companies that exist to support them, have made Houston one of the wealthiest cities in the country and given it a global economic reach that its geography alone would never suggest. The Texas Medical Center, also in Houston, is the largest medical complex in the world, a city within a city, containing more than 60 institutions, treating patients from across the country and around the globe. Dallas is a different kind of Texas city. Where Houston sprawls organically and chaotically, Dallas has always had grander aspirations. A city that has consciously sought to position itself as a world-class metropolis, building cultural institutions and corporate headquarters, and an arts district that is, by the standard of American cities of its size, genuinely impressive. The skyline of Dallas, visible from miles away across the flat North Texas plain, is a statement of ambition, a declaration that this city intends to be taken seriously. The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, the two cities and their surrounding suburbs considered together, is the fourth largest metropolitan area in the United States, with a population approaching 8 million people. It is one of the fastest-growing regions in the country, drawing corporations relocating from California and the Northeast, attracted by lower taxes, lower land costs, and a business environment that Texas has deliberately cultivated for decades. Fort Worth, Dallas's western neighbor and historical rival, has its own distinct character, more rooted in the ranching and agricultural traditions of the Texas interior, less cosmopolitan in its self-presentation, and more comfortable with the Western identity that Dallas sometimes seems slightly embarrassed by. The Fort Worth stockyards, where cattle were driven and traded for a century, still operate as a working facility, and the Chisholm Trail that once carried longhorn cattle north to Kansas markets is remembered here not as nostalgia, but as foundational history. San Antonio is the oldest of Texas's major cities and, in many ways, the most layered. Founded as a Spanish mission settlement in 1718, it carries its history in its architecture and its culture in a way that Houston and Dallas, newer cities built on different foundations, simply do not. The San Antonio River Walk, a network of paths and restaurants and hotels along the banks of the San Antonio River, below street level in the heart of the city, is one of the most visited tourist destinations in the United States. But San Antonio is not a city that exists for tourists. It is a city of 1.4 million people, majority Hispanic, deeply connected to its Mexican heritage, where the border between American and Mexican culture is not a line but a gradient, a continuous blending of language and food and music and family structure that produces something distinct from either. Austin is the state capital and, in the past 2 decades, the city that has most dramatically rewritten the story of what Texas can be. The arrival of the technology industry, drawn by the University of Texas, by a music and arts scene that produced South by Southwest, and by the particular energy of a city that had cultivated a reputation for weirdness in a state that cultivated a reputation for conformity, transformed Austin from a mid-sized college town into one of the fastest-growing cities in the United States. Tesla, Apple, Google, Oracle, and dozens of other major technology companies have established significant presences here. The population has grown so rapidly that the infrastructure has struggled to keep pace, and the city that once prided itself on its affordability and its livability is now grappling with the consequences of its own success: rising housing costs, worsening traffic, and the particular anxiety of a place that is changing faster than its residents can process. The challenges Texas carries: a story of grit and resilience. Texas's problems are as large as its ambitions, and it faces them with the same combination of confidence and stubbornness that characterizes its approach to everything else. The power grid failure of February 2021 Dow, when a winter storm overwhelmed the state's independent electrical grid, leaving millions of Texans without heat for days in sub-freezing temperatures, resulting in hundreds of deaths, exposed a vulnerability that Texas's mythology of self-sufficiency had obscured. The decision to maintain an independent power grid, separate from the national grid village, and therefore exempt from federal regulation, had been presented for decades as a point of Texas pride. The storm revealed it as a point of Texas vulnerability. The water crisis is slower and less dramatic than a winter storm, but more fundamental. Texas's population is growing rapidly, faster than almost any other state, and its water infrastructure, built for a smaller and less urban population, is straining to keep pace.